St. Augustine Memorial Hospital rose 15 stories above the city's wealthiest district, its glass and steel facade reflecting sunlight like a monument to modern medicine and even more modern money. Inside, everything whispered expense. Italian marble floors polished to mirror brightness, original artwork chosen by consultants, leather furniture in waiting areas that smelled of luxury. The air itself seemed filtered to a different quality than what ordinary people breathed, climate-controlled to exactly 68 degrees, scented subtly with something between jasmine and antiseptic. This was healthcare for people who could afford perfection. Betty Thompson pushed her cleaning cart down the third-floor corridor at 6:47 a.m., her orthopedic shoes making soft squeaking sounds against the marble. At 71 years old, her body maintained a catalog of every year she had worked, the persistent ache in her lower back from decades of bending, the arthritis in her hands that made gripping the mop handle an exercise in will, the way her knees protested every step like old machinery that needed oil it would never receive. She had started at St. Augustine 48 years ago, back when it was just Augustine Hospital, before the Saint and Memorial were added to justify the price increases. Back then, she was 23, newly married, full of the kind of hope that came from steady employment and a husband who made her laugh. She had worn her uniform with pride, had believed that working in healthcare, even cleaning it, meant she was part of something noble. 4 decades later, the pride remained, but it had been complicated by reality. Her husband Robert had died 3 years ago from the same cancer that St. Augustine treated so effectively in patients who could afford their services. Betty's insurance, the basic plan the hospital offered part-time workers, had covered almost nothing. She had held Robert's hand in a county hospital 40 minutes away, in a shared room with flickering fluorescent lights, while doctors and nurses did their best with inadequate resources. Now, she cleaned the private suites where other people's husbands received experimental treatments and private nurses and meals prepared by actual chefs. She cleaned without resentment. That emotion required energy she couldn't spare. But she cleaned with full awareness of the irony. Her grandson Marcus was 9 now, living with her since her son David had died in Afghanistan 6 years ago. Marcus had asthma. Good asthma medication cost $340 a month, even with her insurance. She worked the early shift at St. Augustine, then took the bus to clean offices downtown 3 afternoons a week. Between both jobs, she almost made enough. Almost. The cart's left wheel needed replacing. It wobbled and veered right if she didn't compensate. But maintenance had more important priorities than cleaning carts. Betty had learned to work with broken things. Her mop handle was wrapped with duct tape where it had cracked. Her uniform, the same style she had worn for 48 years, though this particular set was only 7 years old, had been mended at the hem and under one arm. She washed it every night in her apartment's small sink, hung it to dry, ironed it in the morning. She took pride in her appearance, even if no one noticed. Excuse me. A nurse, young, efficient, already moving past before Betty could respond, navigated around the cart without making eye contact. This was normal. Betty had long ago accepted her invisibility. She was part of the infrastructure, like the HVAC system or the Wi-Fi network. Necessary, but unnoticed. She entered room 304, a private suite that cost $3,000 per night before any medical services. The patient had checked out that morning, leaving behind the detritus of wealthy illness, fresh flowers in crystal vases, half-eaten catered meals, magazines that cost $12 each, a cashmere blanket the patient's family had brought from home and forgotten. Betty stripped the bed with practiced efficiency, her arthritic hands working through familiar motions. The sheets went into her laundry bag. These were special high-thread count linens, washed separately from regular floor supplies. She wiped down surfaces with hospital-grade disinfectant, cleaned the private bathroom until it gleamed, vacuumed the carpet that was itself more expensive than any furniture Betty owned. 45 minutes of work to erase one person's presence and prepare the room for the next. She was finishing when Dr. Victoria Ashworth entered the corridor, her heels clicking with the sharp precision of someone who had never questioned their right to make noise. At 38, Dr. Ashworth had ascended quickly through St. Augustine's administrative ranks. She had started as an emergency room physician, but had discovered that power lay in management, not medicine. As director of operations, she controlled staffing, budgets, and the hospital's increasingly successful strategy of catering to wealthy patients while quietly reducing services for everyone else. She wore designer suits that cost more than Betty earned in a month. Her hair was maintained weekly at a salon that charged $300 for a cut. She drove a Mercedes and lived in a penthouse and spoke at conferences about optimizing healthcare delivery, which seemed to mean finding ways to charge more while spending less on actual care. Dr. Ashworth was speaking on her phone, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who had never learned to modulate for others' comfort. "No, tell them the gala is black tie mandatory. We're not running a charity event, we're cultivating major donors. If they can't afford appropriate attire, they can't afford to support St. Augustine at the level we require." She paused outside room 304, where Betty was emerging with her cart, and her expression shifted to one of distaste, as if Betty's presence had somehow contaminated the hallway's carefully maintained aesthetic. "I'll call you back." Dr. Ashworth ended her call with a sharp tap. "You." Betty stopped, her hand still on the cart's handle. "Yes, ma'am?" "How long have you been working this floor?" "I've cleaned this floor for about 12 years, ma'am. I've worked at St. Augustine for 48 years total." Dr. Ashworth's eyes traveled down Betty's uniform, noting every mended seam, every sign of age and wear. Her lip curled slightly, an expression of disgust she didn't bother to hide. 48 years. In the same position?" "Yes, ma'am. I take pride in my work." "Pride." Dr. Ashworth said the word like it was foreign. "Look at yourself. Look at that uniform, that cart. You're a walking advertisement for everything this hospital has evolved past." Other staff members had begun to notice the interaction. A nurse slowed her walk. Two visitors, a middle-aged couple in expensive casual wear, paused near the elevator, watching with the morbid fascination people reserved for other people's humiliation. "Ma'am, I keep my uniform very clean. I maintain it carefully. It's ancient. You're ancient." Dr. Ashworth's voice rose, performing now for her unwilling audience. "Do you understand what St. Augustine Memorial represents? We're a premier healthcare institution. We charge premium rates because we provide premium experiences, and part of that experience is aesthetics, environment. The feeling that patients are surrounded by excellence." Betty's hands tightened on the cart. In 48 years, she had endured countless small cruelties, the dismissive tones, the invisible treatment, the casual assumption that she was less intelligent, less worthy, less human than the doctors and administrators who walked these halls. But this public degradation, felt different. "I do excellent work, ma'am," Betty said quietly, maintaining her dignity even as her heart pounded. "Every room I clean meets hospital standards. I've never had a complaint." "That's because no one sees you." Dr. Ashworth stepped closer, invading Betty's space with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. "You're background noise. But today, unfortunately, you're very visible. And what I see is someone who lowers the entire atmosphere of this hospital. Someone who makes our patients uncomfortable. Someone like you." She paused, letting the phrase hang in the air, weighted with decades of coded language. "Someone like you shouldn't be working in a facility this prestigious. You should be in some county hospital, some underfunded clinic where appearance doesn't matter. Not here, not in St. Augustine." The nurse who had slowed earlier now stopped completely. The wealthy couple near the elevator pulled out their phone, not to help, but to record, to capture this moment for whatever social media currency it might yield. 3 more staff members had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and their faces showed varying degrees of discomfort and complicity. Betty felt something crack inside her chest, something that had held firm through 48 years of invisible labor. Her son's death, her husband's death. Every early morning, every late night, every aching step in shoes that cost $40 and lasted 3 years if she was careful. All of it so she could earn the right to be told she was too poor, too old, too visible in her invisibility to deserve basic respect. "Ma'am," Betty's voice trembled, but held steady. "I've worked here longer than you've been alive. I've cleaned these floors while doctors saved lives. I've sanitized operating rooms. I've maintained this hospital through 3 renovations and 4 name changes. I may not have a medical degree, but I've been part of this place's foundation for almost 5 decades. Foundation? Dr. Ashworth laughed, sharp and cruel. You're not foundation. You're obsolete infrastructure. You're what we keep around out of some misguided sense of loyalty, when really we should have upgraded to a professional cleaning service years ago." She turned to address the gathered audience, playing to them now, establishing dominance through public humiliation. "This is exactly what I've been telling the board. We can't compete with hospitals like Presbyterian and Cedars-Sinai if we're still employing—" She gestured vaguely at Betty. "People who look like they should be receiving charity care rather than providing services." The elevator doors opened. A man stepped out, tall, dark-haired, wearing a black suit that had been tailored in Italy by someone who understood that clothing was architecture. At 34, Matteo Caruso moved with the controlled precision of violence temporarily restrained. His neck bore a tattoo that crept above his collar, intricate work that marked him as clearly as a signature. He had come to visit one of his men, a soldier who had taken 3 bullets during a dispute over territory and payments. Matteo paid for the private room, paid for the best surgeons, paid for everything because that's what leaders did. They protected their people, even the ones who took bullets meant for someone else. He had been reaching for his phone when Dr. Ashworth's voice had cut through the corridor's usual quiet. He had heard "someone like you" and "obsolete infrastructure" and "charity care," and something in his chest had gone very cold. His grandmother, Nonna Teresa, had worked as a hospital cleaner. Different hospital, same story. She had cleaned while doctors and administrators walked past her like she was furniture. She had cleaned until the day she fell down a stairwell while carrying supplies, breaking her hip and 3 ribs. She had died 6 weeks later from complications, and Matteo had been 17, and no one from the hospital had even sent flowers. Now he stood 15 feet from an elderly black woman in a worn uniform, being degraded by a doctor in designer clothes, and every person in that corridor was choosing silence over intervention. Matteo Caruso began walking toward them, his expensive shoes making no sound on the marble floor, and the atmosphere changed before anyone understood why. Dr. Ashworth sensed him before she saw him, some primitive instinct recognizing predator energy. She turned, her professional smile already forming, ready to charm or dismiss depending on whether this was someone important. The smile died when she saw the tattoo, when she registered the way other staff members had unconsciously stepped back, creating space around this man like he carried his own gravity field. "Can I help you?" Her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by careful neutrality. Matteo stopped 3 feet from Betty, close enough to be protective, far enough to be respectful. He looked at her first, really looked at her, seeing what the others had refused to see. A woman who had worked for nearly 5 decades, who maintained her dignity in a worn uniform, who stood straight despite being publicly degraded. "Ma'am," he said to Betty, his voice gentle in a way that seemed incongruous with everything else about him. "Are you all right?" The kindness in his tone nearly shattered Betty's composure. She had armored herself against cruelty, but unexpected gentleness found the cracks. "Yes, sir. I'm fine. Just finishing my rounds." "No." Matteo's attention shifted to Dr. Ashworth, and his voice shed its gentleness like a snake shedding skin. "She's not fine. Because you just spent 5 minutes degrading her in public for the crime of being old and poor and visible." Dr. Ashworth's professional mask wavered. "I'm sorry. Who are you exactly?" "Someone who heard every word you said." Matteo gestured to the gathered audience, nurses, visitors, staff members who had stopped to watch. "Someone who watched you perform cruelty for an audience. Tell me, Doctor, is public humiliation part of your Hippocratic oath, or is that a specialty you developed on your own? This is a personnel matter." Dr. Ashworth tried to reclaim authority. It concerns anyone with basic humanity." Matteo's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "You said 'someone like you' to this woman. What did you mean by that?" Be specific." The corridor had gone silent. Even the usual hospital sounds, beeping monitors, rolling equipment, distant conversations, seemed to have paused, waiting. "I meant someone whose appearance doesn't meet our institutional standards," Dr. Ashworth said carefully, awareness dawning that she was no longer controlling this interaction. Her appearance? Matteo tilted his head slightly. Her clean, pressed uniform? Her dignified posture? Or did you mean something else? Something about her age, her race, the visible evidence that she's worked hard her entire life while you've climbed administrative ladders? I don't appreciate your tone, and I don't appreciate watching someone abuse power over people who can't fight back. Matteo turned to Betty. How long did you say you've worked here? 48 years, sir. Betty's voice was steadier now, strengthened by having someone stand beside her instead of above her. 48 years. Matteo looked at Dr. Ashworth. She's been maintaining this hospital since before you were born. Cleaning rooms where doctors saved lives, sanitizing operating theaters, being part of the actual work of healthcare while people like you figured out how to monetize suffering. Dr. Ashworth's face flushed. That's completely inappropriate. This is a business. And I'm responsible for maintaining standards that justify our premium position in the market. Premium position. Matteo's laugh was soft and utterly humorless. Let me tell you about premium healthcare, doctor. My grandmother, her name was Teresa Caruso. She worked as a cleaner at Sacred Heart Hospital for 37 years. You know what premium care she received? He stepped closer to Dr. Ashworth, who instinctively moved back. She was carrying cleaning supplies up a stairwell, 4th floor. The elevator was broken. Had been broken for 3 weeks because maintenance budget went to renovating the executive offices instead. She was 73 years old. Her knees were destroyed from decades of kneeling to scrub floors. But she was carrying supplies because that was her job. And people like her don't get to say, "This is too much." Betty's eyes widened, recognizing her own story in his grandmother's. She fell. Matteo's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way of people recounting trauma they've replayed 1,000 times. Broken hip, 3 broken ribs, punctured lung. They treated her in the charity ward of the same hospital where she'd cleaned for 37 years. Shared room, overworked nurses doing their best, died 6 weeks later from complications that wouldn't have happened if she'd received the kind of care this hospital provides to people who can pay. The wealthy couple with the phone had lowered it, their voyeuristic entertainment curdling into something uncomfortable. A nurse had tears on her cheeks. Even the staff members who had been complicit in their silence looked shaken. No one from Sacred Heart came to her funeral, Matteo continued. No flowers, no card. No acknowledgement that Teresa Caruso had spent 37 years of her life keeping their hospital clean. She was just infrastructure, right? Obsolete infrastructure. He turned back to Dr. Ashworth, and his eyes held something that made her take another step backward. I was 17. I watched my grandmother die in a shared room while doctors ran past her bed to treat patients in private suites. That's when I learned that healthcare isn't about healing. It's about profit. And the people who do the actual work, the people who keep hospitals running, they're disposable to people like you. Mr. Dr. Ashworth's voice cracked. I'm sorry about your grandmother, but that was a different hospital. A different situation? No. Matteo pulled out his phone. It's the same situation. Different building. Same story. People like you have been treating people like her, he gestured to Betty, as less than human for generations. And today, I have the power to do something about it. He pressed a number, lifting the phone to his ear. James, it's Matteo Caruso. You know that private hospital in the financial district, St. Augustine Memorial. I want you to find out who owns it, and I want you to arrange a purchase meeting, today. Dr. Ashworth's face went pale. You can't just buy a hospital. Watch me. Matteo's eyes never left her face. St. Augustine is owned by a private equity firm. I know because I checked before I brought my man here. Everything is for sale if you have enough money, doctor. And I have a lot of money. This is insane, Dr. Ashworth stammered. You can't buy an entire hospital because you humiliated an elderly woman who has dedicated nearly 50 years of her life to healthcare. Matteo finished. Yes, I can. And I will. A man appeared at the end of the corridor, Luca, Matteo's driver and bodyguard, summoned by some silent signal. He carried the alert readiness of someone who had seen combat and expected more. Luca, I need you to stay with Miss... Matteo paused, realizing he didn't know Betty's name. Thompson, Betty said quietly. Betty Thompson. Miss Thompson. Stay with her. Make sure she's safe. Make sure no one retaliates against her for this conversation. Matteo's tone made it clear that retaliation would have severe consequences. Dr. Ashworth found her voice. Tried to reassert control. This is absurd. You're making threats in a hospital. I'm calling security. Please do. Matteo smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Call security. Call the board. Call whoever you want. And while you're making calls, ask them who they'd rather keep. A director of operations who publicly humiliates elderly employees, or someone willing to invest tens of millions of dollars in their facility. He turned to the gathered audience of staff members and visitors. Everyone who witnessed what happened here, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what Dr. Ashworth said, how she said it, because when this hospital changes ownership, people are going to ask questions about culture and management and who created an environment where this kind of abuse was acceptable. Betty stood very still, her cleaning cart abandoned, watching this stranger dismantle her tormentor with words as sharp as surgical instruments. Part of her wanted to protest, to say this wasn't necessary, that she could handle her own problems. But another part, the part that had been invisible for 48 years, felt seen for the first time. Matteo's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, nodded once. James found the ownership structure. The PE firm is facing liquidity issues. They'll take a meeting. He looked at Dr. Ashworth. You have until this afternoon to reconsider your career choices. You can't do this, Dr. Ashworth repeated, but her voice had lost conviction. I just did. Matteo offered his arm to Betty, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed strange coming from a man with a neck tattoo and a reputation that preceded him into rooms. Miss Thompson, would you allow me to buy you coffee? I think you've earned a break. Betty looked at her cart, at the work left undone, at 48 years of routine being disrupted by this moment. My shift isn't over, sir. Yes, Matteo said gently. It is. You're done working for people who don't see your worth. Let me take you somewhere we can talk. Betty glanced at Dr. Ashworth, who looked smaller now, diminished by her own cruelty coming back to meet her. She looked at the other staff members, seeing recognition in their faces. How many of them had been treated similarly, had swallowed their dignity to keep their jobs? She placed her arthritic hand on Matteo's arm. Coffee sounds nice, she said. As they walked toward the elevator, Luca falling into protective position behind them, Victoria Ashworth stood in the corridor surrounded by witnesses to her own destruction, learning too late that cruelty always carries a price, and sometimes that price is paid in full. The hospital cafeteria at 8:30 a.m. existed in a strange liminal space. Too late for the night shift's desperate coffee runs, too early for the lunch crowd. Matteo had steered them to a corner table away from the scattering of nurses and residents, a location that offered privacy and clear sightlines to all entrances. Luca positioned himself near the doorway, appearing casual but missing nothing. Betty sat across from Matteo, her arthritic hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she hadn't asked for, but he had insisted on buying. The cup was warm. She couldn't remember the last time someone had bought her coffee. You didn't have to do that, she said finally, breaking the silence that had followed them down 3 floors and through the cafeteria line. Back there, with Dr. Ashworth. Yes, I did. Matteo's coffee sat untouched in front of him. My grandmother died because people like her decided that some lives matter less than others, that some people are infrastructure instead of human beings. Your grandmother, Teresa. Betty said the name carefully, respectfully. The stairwell accident. That's a hard way to lose someone. The accident didn't kill her. The system killed her. Matteo's voice carried the weight of old anger that had calcified into permanent conviction. Sacred Heart could have fixed that elevator, could have provided equipment carts so she didn't have to carry supplies, could have given her the same level of care they gave paying patients. But she was 73 and poor, and had been invisible for 37 years. Why start seeing her when she was dying? Betty understood that anger. She had carried a similar weight since Robert's death, the knowledge that her husband might have survived if they had been able to afford St. Augustine's oncology wing instead of the overwhelmed county hospital 40 minutes away. "I lost my husband 3 years ago," Betty said quietly. "Cancer. Robert was a good man. Worked construction for 40 years. His insurance was like mine. Covered almost nothing. We went to County General. The doctors there tried their best, but they were overwhelmed, underfunded. Robert died in a shared room with fluorescent lights that flickered." She took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady her voice. "Meanwhile, I was cleaning rooms here at St. Augustine, where they treat the same cancer with experimental drugs and private nurses and success rates triple what County General can manage. I cleaned those rooms knowing my husband was dying because we couldn't afford to be patients in the building where I worked." Matteo closed his eyes briefly. "That's the real crime. Not that some people are rich, that we've built a system where your zip code and bank balance determine whether you live or die." "You talk like someone who wants to change things," Betty observed. "But the tattoo on your neck, that's not the mark of someone who works within the system." "No." Matteo smiled slightly, appreciating her directness. "I work outside the system, sometimes against it. I've done things that would shock you, Miss Thompson. Hurt people. Taken what wasn't mine. Built an empire on violence and fear and money that's more red than green if you look closely. Then why help me? Why buy a hospital to protect someone you don't know?" Matteo was quiet for a long moment, watching staff members move through the cafeteria, each person carrying their own invisible burdens. "I was 17 when Nonna Teresa died. Young. Angry. I had a choice. Try to change the system that killed her, or learn to use that system for my own benefit. I chose the second path. Told myself I'd make enough money that no one in my family would ever die in a charity ward again. Did it work? I have more money than I can spend. My people get the best healthcare money can buy. But I didn't change anything fundamental. I just bought my way out of the problem while leaving the system intact for everyone else." He met her eyes. "Today, seeing Dr. Ashworth treat you the way Nonna Teresa was treated, it reminded me that having money doesn't make you good. It just makes you comfortable with the evil you've chosen not to fix." Betty studied this dangerous man across from her, seeing past the expensive suit and the tattoo to something wounded underneath. "So buying the hospital, that's about your grandmother, not about me." "It's about both." Matteo leaned forward slightly. "Miss Thompson, what happened today won't end with Dr. Ashworth being embarrassed. People like her have connections, allies. They'll want revenge, and the easiest target is you." Betty's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "I'm saying you might be. Dr. Ashworth has access to lawyers, to board members, to people who can make your life difficult in ways that look legal. They might not hurt you physically, but they can hurt you economically, get you fired, blacklist you from other jobs, make it impossible to work." "I need this job." Betty's voice cracked slightly. "My grandson Marcus, he's 9. He lives with me since my son died in Afghanistan. Marcus has asthma. His medication costs $340 a month. I work here and I clean offices downtown. Between both jobs, I almost make enough. Almost." Matteo pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and set it on the table between them. "How much do you need? For Marcus's medication, for rent, for whatever emergency is always one paycheck away. I can transfer it right now." Betty stared at the phone screen, showing a balance with more zeros than she had ever seen in one place. "I can't take your money." "It's not charity. It's payment for 48 years of labor that was systematically undervalued." Matteo's voice was gentle but firm. "You said you almost make enough. Let me cover the difference until we figure out something better." "Why would you do that for someone you just met?" "Because I couldn't do it for Nonna Teresa." Matteo picked up his coffee, finally took a sip, grimaced slightly at how it had cooled. "Because I've spent 17 years making money in ways that would disappoint her, and maybe helping you is the first thing I've done in a long time that she'd be proud of." Betty wanted to refuse. 50 years of independence, of making her own way, of never depending on anyone. All of it pushed back against accepting help from this stranger with blood money and good intentions. But she thought of Marcus's inhaler. Thought of last month when she'd had to choose between his medication and groceries and had gone to the food bank for the first time in her life. Thought of the quiet desperation of almost making enough. "Marcus's medication," she said finally, "just until I can find another job." Mateo nodded, his fingers moving across his phone screen. "What's your bank information?" Betty recited her account number, the one attached to a checking account that rarely held more than a few $100s. Mateo typed, pressed send, and set his phone down. "Check your account." Betty pulled out her own phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen, and opened her banking app. The balance showed $5,000 more than it had 5 minutes ago. "That's too much," she protested. "I only need—" "You need a buffer, breathing room, the ability to say no to jobs that don't treat you right." Mateo finished his coffee. "Consider it an advance on the salary you'll earn when I restructure St. Augustine's cleaning services division." "What?" "I'm buying the hospital, restructuring management, and I'm creating a new position, Director of Environmental Services. Real title, real salary, real benefits. You've been doing the work for 48 years. Now you'll get paid what it's worth." Betty felt tears prick her eyes, fought them back. "Mr. Caruso. Mateo. Mateo." She tried the name, found it fit. "You don't know me. You don't know if I can do administrative work or— You've managed to survive 48 years in a system designed to crush people like you. You've raised a grandson while working 2 jobs. You've maintained dignity while being treated as invisible." Mateo stood, offered his hand to help her up. "That's more qualification than most executives have." Betty took his hand, let him help her to her feet. Her arthritis protested, but his grip was gentle, respectful of her pain. "There's one more thing," Mateo said as they walked toward the exit. "Until the hospital sale goes through and Dr. Ashworth is officially gone, I want you to take a few days off. Stay home with Marcus. Luca will check on you, make sure you're safe." "I can't just not work." "You're on paid leave, medical leave, stress-related incident in the workplace." Mateo's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. "Let me handle the dangerous part. You focus on being safe." He pulled out a business card, wrote a number on the back. "This is my personal cell. Not many people have it. If anything happens, anything that makes you uncomfortable, you call me, day or night." Betty took the card, studied the simple elegance of it. "Why are you doing all this?" "Because someone should have done it for Nonna Teresa," Mateo said simply. "Because it's 17 years too late for her, but it's not too late for you." Outside the cafeteria, Luca waited to escort Betty to her car. Mateo watched them go, then pulled out his phone and called James. "The hospital," he said. "I want ownership transferred within 48 hours, whatever it costs. And James, start looking into Dr. Victoria Ashworth's employment history. I want to know every complaint filed against her, every person she's abused. We're building a case." He ended the call and looked up at St. Augustine Memorial's sterile corridors. Thinking of his grandmother's broken body in a charity ward, thinking of Betty Thompson's 48 years of invisible labor. Sometimes money could fix things. Sometimes power could protect people. And sometimes revenge dressed itself up as justice and felt righteous anyway. 4 days passed in a strange suspended reality. Betty stayed home with Marcus, watching him do homework at their small kitchen table, measuring out his asthma medication with hands that no longer ached quite as badly because she wasn't scrubbing floors 8 hours a day. The $5,000 in her account felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. Luca checked on them twice daily, morning and evening, always polite, always alert, his presence a reminder that protection and danger often wore the same face. Marcus had asked questions, of course. Why wasn't Grandma working? Who was the man in the nice car who kept stopping by? Betty had told him simplified versions of the truth, that she'd had trouble at work, that a kind man was helping them, that everything would be okay soon. She hoped she wasn't lying. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus's inhaler ran out. Betty checked the prescription, one refill remaining. She could pick it up at the pharmacy 6 blocks away, be back in 30 minutes. Luca had left 20 minutes ago after his morning check. She texted him, "Going to pharmacy for Marcus's medication. We'll be quick." His response came immediately, "Wait, I'll take you." But Marcus was having trouble breathing, that slight wheeze that meant his lungs were tightening, and Betty had dealt with asthma emergencies before. 30 minutes. She could manage 30 minutes. "Come on, baby," she said to Marcus. "Let's get your medicine." The September afternoon was warm, the 6-block walk familiar. Marcus held her hand, his breathing slightly labored but not critical yet. They passed Mr. Kim's grocery, the laundromat where Betty washed their clothes every Sunday, the church where she attended service when exhaustion didn't keep her home. This was her neighborhood. She was safe here. The pharmacy was busy, always busy on Thursday afternoons when people picked up prescriptions before the weekend. Betty stood in line, Marcus beside her, watching the pharmacist move efficiently behind the counter. She didn't notice the 2 men enter behind them until one spoke. "Betty Thompson?" She turned. They were in their 30s, wearing business casual, khakis, polo shirts, the kind of generic professional attire that could belong to salesmen or insurance adjusters or hospital administrators. But their eyes were wrong, too focused, too cold. "Yes?" Betty's hand tightened on Marcus's. "We need to talk to you about the incident at St. Augustine." The taller one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Ashworth wants to resolve this matter privately. She's prepared to offer compensation for any distress you experienced." "I don't want compensation." Betty's voice was steady despite her accelerating heartbeat. "I just want to pick up my grandson's medication." "Of course." The second man, shorter, broader, moved slightly to her left, a subtle positioning that blocked her exit path. "But you need to understand the situation. Mr. Caruso's involvement has created complications, legal complications. Dr. Ashworth needs you to sign a statement saying the incident was a misunderstanding, that no harassment occurred." Other customers in the pharmacy had begun to notice the interaction. An elderly woman, 2 people ahead in line, glanced back nervously. The pharmacist's attention had shifted from her computer screen to the scene unfolding in her store. "I'm not signing anything," Betty said firmly. "Please move. My grandson needs his medication." "Your grandson!" The taller man looked down at Marcus with an expression that made Betty's blood run cold. "Marcus, right? 9 years old. Lincoln Elementary School. Gets out at 3:15 every day." The threat was unmistakable. Betty pulled Marcus behind her, her body between him and these men. "Don't you dare!" "We're just stating facts, Miss Thompson." The shorter man's voice was reasonable, almost friendly. "Facts like how you have no legal protection right now. How Mr. Caruso's money doesn't change the fact that you assaulted Dr. Ashworth with false accusations. How child services might be interested in knowing that you're involving a 9-year-old boy in conflicts with dangerous criminals. I didn't assault anyone, and Mr. Caruso isn't—" Betty stopped, realizing that defending Mateo's character was complicated when she didn't actually know what he did beyond the obvious. "Isn't what? Dangerous?" The taller man laughed. "Mateo Caruso runs one of the largest criminal organizations in the city, and you've accepted his money, his protection, his promises. That makes you complicit, and it makes Marcus next in line." The pharmacist's voice cut through the tension, sharp and loud. She was staring directly at Betty, her expression urgent. "Ma'am, your prescription is ready. Come up here now." Betty moved quickly, pulling Marcus with her, grateful for the intervention. Behind the counter, the pharmacist worked with deliberate efficiency, scanning the prescription, printing labels, her voice low. "I called 911. Police are 2 minutes away. Those men aren't hospital administrators. I recognize one from a collection agency that uses intimidation tactics. Get your medicine and go out the back exit, through the storage room, now." She handed Betty the medication and a piece of paper with an address. "My cousin owns a store 3 blocks east. Go there. Wait. Don't go home until you know you're safe." Betty took the inhaler and the address, her hands shaking. "Thank you." "Go." She and Marcus hurried through the employees-only door, through a storage room that smelled of cardboard and antiseptic, out into an alley behind the pharmacy. Betty pulled out her phone, called the number Matteo had given her. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Thompson? 2 men just threatened Marcus." Betty's voice was barely steady. "At the pharmacy. They knew his school, his schedule. They said—" Her voice broke. "They said things about child services and being complicit. Matteo, they threatened my grandson." "Where are you right now?" Matteo's voice had gone cold, professional. Betty gave him the pharmacist's cousin's address. "I'm going there now. The pharmacist called the police, but they'll take statements and file reports and nothing will happen fast enough." Matteo's tone carried certainty born from experience with systems that moved slowly. "Listen to me carefully. Go to that address. Stay there. I'm sending Luca now. He's 5 minutes from your location. Do not leave with anyone except Luca. Not police, not hospital security, not anyone who says they're trying to help. Only Luca." "Okay." Betty pulled Marcus closer as they walked quickly down the alley. "Matteo, I'm sorry. You warned me this might happen, and I thought—" "You thought you could pick up medication in your own neighborhood without being threatened. That's not something you should have to apologize for." Anger vibrated beneath his controlled tone. "I should have provided better protection. That's on me." They emerged from the alley onto a quieter street. Betty checked behind them. No sign of the men from the pharmacy. "What are you going to do?" "Fix this." 2 words, simply stated, that somehow carried the weight of impending violence. Dr. Ashworth wanted to escalate. Now she'll learn what escalation actually looks like. Betty reached the address, a small electronics repair shop with barred windows and a closed sign. She knocked, and a young woman opened the door immediately, clearly expecting them. "You're Betty? My cousin called. Come in." She ushered them inside, locked the door behind them. "You can wait in the back room. There's water, snacks if the boy's hungry." Marcus was quiet, his breathing easier now that he'd used his inhaler, but his eyes were wide with fear that he was trying to hide. Betty pulled him onto her lap in a worn armchair, holding him like she had when he was smaller, before his father died, and made him try to be brave too soon. Her phone rang. "Luca." "I'm outside." The young woman let him in, tall, alert, carrying tension like a loaded weapon. He assessed the situation in seconds. "Anyone follow you?" "I don't think so." "Good." Luca's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his expression darkened. "We need to move. Now." "What's wrong?" Betty stood, still holding Marcus's hand. "Matteo got intel. Dr. Ashworth didn't just send intimidation. She hired people, professionals, not the pharmacy amateurs. They're planning to grab Marcus from school tomorrow, use him as leverage to force you to sign legal documents absolving her of wrongdoing." Betty felt her world tilt. "They're going to kidnap him?" "They were." Luca's voice was grim. "But Matteo's people intercepted the plan. We're taking Marcus somewhere safe right now. You too. Separate locations. If they can't find you together, they can't use one to threaten the other." "No." Betty's voice was firm, despite her fear. "I'm not sending my grandson away alone. We stay together. Miss Thompson? We stay together." Betty met Luca's eyes with the full force of 50 years of survival. "I've lost my husband and my son. I'm not losing Marcus. We stay together, or you'll have to carry me out of here." Luca studied her for a moment, then nodded with what might have been respect. "Together, then. But we go now. Matteo has a safe house outside the city. Secure, supplied, and he's dealing with Dr. Ashworth's hired help personally." "What does that mean?" Betty asked, though part of her already knew. "It means," Luca said carefully, "that the people who were planning to take Marcus won't be a problem anymore, and it means Dr. Ashworth is about to learn that there are consequences for threatening children." He opened the door, checking the street carefully before gesturing them forward. "My car is right here. Stay low. Move fast." As Betty and Marcus hurried into Luca's vehicle, Betty's phone buzzed with a text from Matteo. "I've got you. You're safe now. Both of you, I promise." Betty held Marcus close in the back seat as Luca drove, watching her neighborhood disappear behind them, heading toward safety, purchased with blood money and good intentions. And she sent a prayer to whatever God protected grandmothers and frightened children, that Matteo Caruso was as good as his word. The safe house sat 40 minutes outside the city, disguised as an ordinary suburban home on a quiet street where lawn care services maintained precise edges and neighborhood watch signs promised vigilant protection. Inside, it was something else entirely. Reinforced doors, security cameras covering every angle, a panic room disguised as a walk-in closet, and enough supplies to sustain occupants for weeks. Luca had shown them the basics: how to arm the security system, where the emergency supplies were stored, the phone that connected directly to Matteo's people. Then he'd positioned himself in the living room with a clear view of both entrances, his presence simultaneously comforting and a stark reminder of why they needed protection. Marcus had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted by fear and medication and the strange adventure his life had become. Betty sat beside him, one hand resting on his chest to feel his breathing, steady and clear for now. Her phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Matteo. How is he? No preamble, just concern. Sleeping, breathing well. Betty kept her voice low. Matteo, what's happening? Where are you? Handling things. In the background, Betty could hear voices, movement, the particular quality of echoes that suggested a large, empty space. The men from the pharmacy. They're cooperating, telling us everything about who hired them, the plan to take Marcus, how much Dr. Ashworth paid them. Are they... Betty stopped, unsure how to ask if they were still alive. They're fine. Scared, but fine. I don't hurt people unnecessarily, Miss Thompson. I just make sure they understand that certain choices have certain consequences. Matteo's voice softened. I'm sorry you're in this position. You should be home, in your own bed, not hiding because someone decided your dignity was worth less than their reputation. This isn't your fault. Dr. Ashworth made her choices, and now she'll live with them. Something in Matteo's tone made Betty shiver. I'm going to see her tonight, at the hospital. She's working late, probably trying to figure out how to spin this situation. I'm going to give her a different perspective. Matteo, don't do anything that will... Betty paused, searching for the right words. Don't do anything that will make you someone your grandmother wouldn't recognize. Silence on the line. Then quietly. That's already happened, Miss Thompson. Years ago. But maybe I can be someone she'd forgive. He ended the call. Betty sat in the safe house's expensive silence, holding her sleeping grandson, and wondered what forgiveness looked like when purchased with violence and money that remembered blood. St. Augustine Memorial Hospital at 10:30 p.m. operated on reduced staff and dimmed lights, the daytime chaos compressed into essential services. Matteo entered through the executive entrance, the door code provided by James, who had proven remarkably efficient at extracting information from the private equity firm that currently owned the facility. Currently, past tense, as of 3 hours ago, when the sale had finalized. Matteo now owned St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. Every floor, every department, every employee contract, including Dr. Victoria Ashworth's. She was in her office on the administrative floor, exactly where James said she would be. Through the glass wall, Matteo could see her at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, her expression frustrated. Probably talking to lawyers. Probably trying to figure out how to suppress the video that had spread across social media. 5 million views, and counting of her degrading an elderly woman in a hospital corridor. Matteo opened her door without knocking. Dr. Ashworth looked up, annoyance flashing across her face, before recognition changed it to something more cautious. Mr. Caruso. Visiting hours are over, and this is a private office. Not anymore. Matteo closed the door behind him, noting the way her hand moved instinctively toward her desk drawer, probably where she kept pepper spray or a panic button. As of 7:15 p.m. this evening, I own this hospital, which makes this my office, which makes you my employee, for about 5 more minutes. The color drained from Dr. Ashworth's face. You can't just... That's impossible. Hospital acquisitions take months, regulatory approval, board votes. They take months when you're following normal procedures. When you have enough money and the right connections, things move faster. Mateo remained standing, letting her feel the disadvantage of sitting while he towered. The private equity firm was facing liquidity issues. I offered 30% above market value, cash, immediate close. They didn't even counteroffer. Dr. Ashworth stood, trying to reclaim some height. This is a hostile takeover. There are laws, procedures. All followed meticulously. James is very thorough about documentation. Mateo pulled out his phone, opened a folder, set it on her desk. What's not legal is hiring men to intimidate elderly women in pharmacies or planning to kidnap a 9-year-old child to use as leverage. Those are actual crimes, doctor, not just ethical violations, actual felonies. I don't know what you're talking about. But her voice wavered, and her eyes flicked to the phone on her desk, calculating whether she could call for help before he stopped her. The men you hired told me everything. Names, payments, the entire plan. They were very cooperative once they understood the alternative. Mateo's smile was cold. You were going to have Marcus Thompson taken from his school. Hold him until Betty signed a statement saying she lied about the incident in the corridor. Then you were going to have her discredited, probably fired, maybe even arrested for fraud or harassment. That's insane. Why would I? Because you're terrified. Mateo leaned forward, hands flat on her desk. Because that video went viral. Because your reputation is being destroyed in real time across every social media platform. Because the board was already talking about asking for your resignation before I bought them out. You were desperate, and desperate people make stupid choices. Dr. Ashworth's professional mask cracked completely. She cost me everything. That woman, that cleaner, she ruined my career because she couldn't handle legitimate criticism about her appearance. Stop. Mateo's voice cut through her building hysteria. Betty Thompson didn't cost you anything. You cost yourself everything the moment you decided that someone's worth was measured by their bank account. The moment you chose cruelty over compassion in a building dedicated to healing. He straightened, pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is your termination letter, effective immediately. You're fired for cause, specifically harassment, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Your medical license will be reported to the state board with full documentation of your actions. You'll likely face criminal charges once I turn over the evidence to the district attorney, who happens to be a friend. You can't do this. Dr. Ashworth's voice had gone shrill. I'll sue. I'll fight this. I have lawyers. Who will advise you to accept the termination and hope for leniency from the DA? Mateo dropped the envelope on her desk. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal items and leave the building. Security has already been notified. If you're still here in 11 minutes, you'll be escorted out. This is revenge. Dr. Ashworth grabbed the envelope, her hands shaking. You're destroying my life over a cleaning woman who... Her name is Betty Thompson. Mateo's voice dropped to something dangerous. She's not a cleaning woman. She's a person who worked in this hospital for 48 years with more dignity and grace than you've shown in your entire career. And if you call her anything other than her name one more time, I will forget that I promised Miss Thompson I wouldn't do anything Nonna Teresa wouldn't forgive. The threat hung in the air between them, and Dr. Ashworth finally understood the full scope of her miscalculation. She had thought she was dealing with an elderly woman who had no power, no options, no ability to fight back. She hadn't accounted for the stranger with a neck tattoo and a dead grandmother and enough money to buy hospitals on principle. Get out, Mateo said quietly. 10 minutes. The clock started when I walked in. Dr. Ashworth grabbed her purse, her phone, a framed diploma from her wall. She moved toward the door, then paused. What about Betty Thompson? You think buying a hospital and firing me makes you a hero? You're still a criminal, still someone who built an empire on violence. You didn't save her. You just made her complicit in your world. Mateo considered this, finding truth in the accusation that stung more than he wanted to admit. Maybe. But I'd rather be a criminal who protects people than a doctor who abuses them. At least I'm honest about what I am. Dr. Ashworth left without responding. Her expensive heels clicking rapidly down the corridor, the sound of a powerful woman reduced to just another person running from consequences. Matteo stood in the office, his office now, and called Betty. "It's done," he said when she answered. "Dr. Ashworth is gone. The people she hired are cooperating with police. You and Marcus are safe." "What did you do?" Betty's voice was careful, trying to read between his words for the violence she feared he might have committed. "I fired her. Documented everything for criminal prosecution. Bought the hospital so she can't come back or retaliate." Matteo moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. "No one got hurt, Miss Thompson, just exposed and held accountable." "And now what?" "Marcus and I stay in hiding forever." "No, you come home tomorrow. I'll have security watching your building for a few weeks, just to be safe. But the actual threat is over." Matteo paused. "There is one more thing. The hospital. I need to reorganize it. Change how it operates. Stop treating healthcare like a luxury good, and start treating it like what it's supposed to be. That's ambitious. It's necessary. And I need someone who understands what patients actually need. Someone who's seen both sides, the people who can afford St. Augustine, and the people who die in county hospitals." He took a breath. "I meant what I said about the Director of Environmental Services position. Real job, real salary, real authority to change how this hospital treats its workers. Are you interested?" Betty was quiet for a long moment. Marcus stirred on the couch beside her, still sleeping but shifting. "Matteo?" "I'm 71 years old. I've cleaned floors my entire life. I don't have a degree or training in administration. You have 48 years of experience watching this system fail people. You have wisdom earned through survival. You have integrity that most administrators lost somewhere between medical school and their first executive bonus." Matteo's voice was earnest. "I can buy a hospital, Miss Thompson, but I can't make it humane. That requires someone who remembers what it's like to be invisible." "Let me think about it," Betty said finally. "Let me talk to Marcus. Let me make sure we're really safe before I make decisions about the future." "Fair enough. Take all the time you need." Matteo ended the call and stood in the office that used to belong to someone who had forgotten that healing required compassion, not just credentials. He called James. "Draft a new mission statement for St. Augustine. Something about accessible healthcare and treating all patients with dignity, regardless of ability to pay. And start looking into how we can offer sliding scale payments and charity care without bankrupting the operation." "That's going to be complicated," James warned. "Good things usually are." Matteo smiled slightly. "And James? Thank you for moving fast on this, for helping me do something Nonna Teresa might actually be proud of." "She'd be proud you're trying," James said. "That's more than most people do." Matteo left St. Augustine Memorial Hospital at midnight, the building now his responsibility and his opportunity to transform vengeance into something resembling redemption, one elderly cleaning woman and one fired doctor at a time. The renovation of St. Augustine Memorial Hospital's third floor had taken 11 months and cost Matteo more than he had budgeted, but the result was worth every dollar. Where luxury private suites had once catered exclusively to wealthy patients, now there was a mix. Some premium rooms still, because the hospital needed revenue, but also subsidized care wings where payment was determined by income, where county hospital patients could receive the same quality treatment as millionaires. Betty Thompson stood in her office, a real office with her name on the door and a window overlooking the city, reviewing applications for the hospital's new community healthcare initiative. At 73, she wore professional clothes she had selected herself, comfortable shoes that didn't hurt, and reading glasses that had been covered by the excellent vision insurance St. Augustine provided all employees. Her title was Director of Patient Dignity and Environmental Services, a position Matteo had created that combined oversight of cleaning staff with patient advocacy. Betty ensured that the people who cleaned rooms were treated with respect, paid living wages, given benefits that actually covered their needs. And she made sure patients who couldn't afford care still received it, navigating the complex system Matteo had built to subsidize treatment without bankrupting the hospital. It was hard work, important work. Work that made her 48 years of invisible labor feel like preparation rather than punishment. "Mrs. Thompson?" A young woman stood in the doorway, one of the new cleaning staff, hired 3 months ago. The family in 412 wanted to thank you personally. You helped them get their daughter's surgery covered." Betty smiled, remembering the family. Working class, insurance that covered almost nothing. A daughter with a tumor that required immediate treatment. Betty had navigated them through St. Augustine's sliding scale program, found additional funding through charitable grants, made sure the girl received care that would have been impossible 18 months ago. "Tell them I'll stop by later," Betty said. "And, Maria, how are you doing? Is the schedule working with your class times?" Maria attended community college, studying to be a nurse, working part-time at St. Augustine, with a schedule Betty had personally arranged to accommodate her education. "It's perfect. Thank you." After Maria left, Betty returned to her computer, then paused as she heard familiar footsteps in the corridor. Matteo appeared in her doorway, still wearing expensive suits, still carrying the visible mark of his world on his neck. But something had softened in him over 18 months, a ease in his posture, a genuine warmth in his smile that reached his eyes now. "Miss Thompson." He had never stopped calling her that, despite her repeated insistence that Betty was fine. Some formalities were about respect, not distance. "Mr. Caruso." She matched his formality with a smile that took the edge off. "What brings you to the 3rd floor?" "Monthly review meeting. Thought we could walk the floor together first, see how things are operating in real time, rather than just looking at reports." They walked through the renovated wing, and Matteo listened as Betty pointed out improvements, challenges, the ongoing work of transforming a luxury hospital into something that served everyone. In room 304, the same room where Betty had been cleaning 18 months ago when her life changed, a middle-aged man recovered from cardiac surgery. His family gathered around him, and no one was asking how he would pay because Betty had already ensured the costs were covered through the hospital's charitable care fund. "You've built something remarkable," Matteo said as they stood in the corridor where Dr. Ashworth had once humiliated Betty in front of witnesses. Nonna Teresa would have loved seeing this. "She'd be proud of you," Betty said gently. "You took your anger and your money and your power, and you made something good. That takes more courage than violence." Matteo was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Ashworth was convicted last month. Conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, harassment, 3 years in prison." "I heard." Betty had chosen not to attend the trial, had let the justice system handle it while she focused on building rather than punishing. "Do you think about her?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think about the choice I made, to use what happened as an excuse to change things, rather than just destroy her and walk away." He looked at Betty. "You gave me that choice, by trusting me, by taking the job, by believing that someone like me could do something that mattered. You always could," Betty said. "You just needed a reason to remember it." Marcus appeared around the corner, now 10 years old, healthy, carrying a backpack covered in patches from the gifted program at his new school, the one with small classes and excellent teachers that Betty could now afford. He spent afternoons at St. Augustine, doing homework in Betty's office, watched over by staff who knew his grandmother had transformed their workplace. "Grandma, can we go home? I finished my math homework and I'm hungry." "Of course, baby." Betty gathered her things, then turned to Matteo. "Same time next month?" "Same time next month," he confirmed. "And Betty, thank you for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for seeing me." As Betty and Marcus left St. Augustine Memorial Hospital, walking past the marble floors she once cleaned on her hands and knees, past the corridors where she had been invisible for 48 years, she thought about her husband Robert, who had died in a county hospital because they couldn't afford better. She thought about her son David, who had died serving his country. She thought about all the years of surviving instead of living, and she thought about the moment when a stranger with a neck tattoo and a dead grandmother had walked into a corridor and decided that cruelty deserved consequences, that dignity deserved defending, that one person standing up could change everything. St. Augustine Memorial Hospital was different now. Not perfect, still complicated, still navigating the impossible balance between financial sustainability and ethical care. But it was better. cleaner in ways that had nothing to do with sanitized floors and everything to do with treating every person who entered as someone who mattered. Somewhere, maybe, Rosa Moretti and Robert Thompson looked down and smiled. And somewhere in an office on the administrative floor, Matteo Caruso reviewed plans for expanding the subsidized care program to 2 more hospitals, slowly transforming his empire from something his grandmother would have mourned into something she might have forgiven. 1 hospital at a time, 1 elderly woman's dignity at a time, 1 choice to be better at a time. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start.